This man ate his victim with a bowl of pasta. It was April 1998 in Darlington in County Durham. Julie Patterson was a mum of 4, but unfortunately due to mental health and addiction issues, she'd had her children taken off her. She'd been struggling with depression, alcoholism, and Valium addiction. Now, Julie was living with her boyfriend Alan Taylor. He was the dad to her youngest child. Julie was known to regularly go out to pubs and stay out all night, sometimes for days. Alan was kind of used to this behaviour by now. So when she failed to return home after a night out at the pub, Alan kind of felt like this was normal behaviour for Julie. He thought she'd just been, as we say in the UK, just kind of out on the sesh. However, time went on and Julie still didn't come home. Then she missed an important appointment about the custody of her children, so Alan knew something was seriously wrong. Now, Alan reported her missing to police and a huge search was underway, and initially police actually thought that she was potentially in danger of harm from herself. They thought that due to her depression and also the alcoholism, she could have ended up hurting herself in some way. Weeks went by with no news of the missing mother. That was until police got a tip from a member of the public, which led them to a secluded area by Darlington Football Club. Cadaver dogs helped the police to locate a bin bag. Abandoned near the football club, they found a bin bag with what looked like shoulder blades of a human sticking out. After recovering partial human remains, another tip came into police. A local man named David Harker, who was infamous in the area for stumbling around drunk on cider, had apparently confessed to killing the mother. He'd reportedly been bragging about dismembering her body. The 24-year-old, interestingly, actually seemed to have a way with women, believe it or not. He was apparently charming and managed to be fairly promiscuous. He would cheat on any girlfriends he had and won women over with an apparent caring and sensitive side. However, this was all an act. David was a compulsive liar and would fly into aggressive rages when he had a drink and didn't get his own way. David had bragged to his friends that he'd killed the missing woman and chopped her up. Some of them just thought he was drunk and making stuff up, but then it dawned on them that he may genuinely be confessing to murder. Police were notified and David's flat was searched. Damning evidence was found, including some of Julie's belongings and pools of her blood. David admitted the pair had gone back to his flat for a sexual encounter, and then he got bored. He said he decided to attack her with her own tights and proceeded to then cook parts of her body once she was dead. He ate part of her thigh with pasta and cheese and then dumped some of her body parts near the football club. Some of her body parts, however, were not found, including her head, and David refused to reveal to Julie's loved ones where he had disposed of this. This obviously infuriated police and the family. David told his friends he wanted to become a serial killer known as the Devil Man. Officers felt that David was psychopathic, feeling no remorse for his crime. He was found guilty of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility and given life in prison. This was far from the end of the tragedies of this case, though. Julie's boyfriend Alan became obsessed with trying to find the rest of her body. He would frequently go out digging, desperately trying to uncover something. Alan actually ended up struggling with alcohol addiction himself in an attempt to numb his grief. Then another tragedy. In 2006, Alan was drinking with his friend John Morrison. Suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, Alan began to strangle John. He strangled him with his hands and then a belt until he was deceased. Alan was arrested for killing the unemployed bachelor, who was described as a gentleman. Alan stated his reason for doing this was because he was desperate to get inside of Wakefield prison at his girlfriend's killer. Alan was diagnosed with PTSD and was given life with a minimum of 13 years for killing John.
A FedEx driver tried to lure a teenage girl into his truck. This happened April 1st of 2026 on Pondtown Road in Pennsylvania, and the driver was Luis Hernandez Martinez, a 37-year-old man. The girl was walking along this road coming back from a park. He initially had driven past her, but then turned around and parked right next to her. He was insisting for her number, asking if she had a boyfriend, and was trying to convince her to get into the truck with him. He even said the words, "You will be safe with me," which is especially concerning considering that he unplugged the interior rear camera that all of the FedEx trucks have. So if anything happened to her inside of the truck, there would be no audio and no video of it, despite the fact that those cameras are in there for safety purposes and accountability. Now, thankfully, nothing bad happened to the teenage girl, and she was able to relay this information to the authorities, and they worked with FedEx to figure out and confirm that it was Lewis who did this. And FedEx has issued a statement that Lewis no longer works for them. He was charged with a misdemeanor for luring a child into a vehicle and corruption of minors, and was taken to an Adams County prison with a bail set at $10,000. His next hearing is going to be on May 6th of 2026.
This case has so many twists and turns that you won't know what to believe. It was the 13th of July 2017 in McLean in Virginia. Pam Hagen lived in a luxurious house with her daughters and one granddaughter. These were 24-year-old Helen, 34-year-old Megan, and Megan's 8-year-old daughter. Pam was a loving mother who was generous to her daughters, who she just wanted to have a better life. Behind the scenes, though, things were getting tense in the household. Pam was reportedly planning to buy her youngest daughter Helen a house. She apparently was refusing to do the same for her eldest daughter, though, which was causing tension. Another issue was that although Pam wanted to buy a house for Helen, she didn't like Helen's boyfriend. She told Helen that she would buy her the house under the condition that her boyfriend Carlos didn't live there. On the day in question, Pam began to panic. She'd had a notification that someone was trying to steal $400,000 out of her bank account. She asked Megan if she could go to the bank and try and sort this out. Megan did so, and she was captured on CCTV doing this. The issue seemed to be resolved until the next day. At 11:30 a.m, Helen's boyfriend Carlos got a panicked call from Helen. He said she sounded really scared. He said that Helen had said that Megan had killed their mum. It's not really clear what happened between the time period of 11:30 a.m. and 1:15 p.m, but it's believed that Carlos then tried to ring her back at 1:15 p.m. This time he wasn't able to get through to Helen. He rang police and told them that he feared something really bad had happened to her as well as the mum. At 3 p.m, police arrived on the scene to discover 2 dead bodies. Pam was deceased in the utility room and had a blanket covering her and a phone on top of her. Helen was also deceased in the upstairs bathroom with a rifle between her legs. She had a gunshot wound to the head. When police tracked Megan down and interviewed her, she said that she was at the house earlier on in the day, and then her mum and sister had started having an argument. She said it was an argument about the buying of the house and Carlos not being allowed to live in the house. It seemed that the deaths may have been a murder and then a self-unaliving. However, officers were skeptical and they felt that the scene had been staged. There was physical evidence pointing to the fact that things had been set up. There was a significant lack of blood on the rifle. There was also evidence that the phone on top of Pam's body had been wiped clean. Why would this be the case unless somebody was trying to get away with a crime? The most damning piece of evidence was Helen's gunshot wound. It was eventually determined she'd actually been shot in the top of the head. Then came a shocking confession. Megan finally admitted that the fraudulent bank transfer attempt had come from her and it was her trying to get her mum's money. She did, however, maintain innocence relating to the murders. She was then charged with double murder in 2018. Now, initially at her trial, she was found guilty of both murders and given 2 life sentences. However, the story does not end there. In 2022, the conviction was overturned. It was found that juror misconduct had occurred. A member of the jury had apparently tried to recreate the murder scene and found that the theory that Megan's defense team had presented, which was effectively that Helen had put the rifle between her legs and used her toe to pull the trigger, wasn't actually plausible. The fact that she'd done this and then shared this information with the rest of the jury was juror misconduct. There was then a retrial in 2023. Finally, Megan was found guilty again in 2024 and given life in prison. The most terrifying thing about this photo is at a glance you don't even notice anything's wrong. Before we start today's case, if you guys do prefer deep dives, I post a brand new case on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation, every single week. It was the 10th of February 2025 in Bighorn County, Wyoming. Family of 6, the Harshman family, looked picture perfect to the outside world. They really looked like they had it all. The couple looked super happy and content together. The kids were adorable. What more could you want? The family were actually somewhat of like a blended family. family. Tranielle, the mum, had been previously with this guy, Quinn. They'd had 2 daughters together, the eldest girls, Olivia and Braylee. They had then split up, but their dad was still very much in the girls' lives, and Tranielle started dating a guy called Cliff. Now, Cliff was an amazing stepdad to these girls. He really did truly care about them and treat them like they were his own daughters. And when Cliff and Tranielle got married, they had 2 more little girls, Brooke and Jordan. Husband Cliff was actually away on a business trip on this particular date. He worked really hard to provide for his little girls. And at this point, the girls were actually homesick with the flu. Cliff had absolutely no idea of the devastation that he would end up coming home to. On the day in question, at around 1:30 p.m, police got a phone call, and the dispatcher had never heard anything like this before. On the other end of the line, Tranielle said she had shot her 4 daughters and was about to do the same to herself. The dispatcher scrambled to find the right words. I mean, what do you say in that situation? In the end, she just started pleading with the mum not to do anything, not to move. Please just do not harm yourself. But Tranielle simply replied that the 2 youngest girls were in their cribs upstairs, dead, and the eldest girls also dead in their shared bedroom. She told the dispatcher it was simply too late. When I say the police and the emergency services raced over to that property, they burst through the door and they were like, please, let's just be able to save one of them. They found Tranielle on the floor with a gunshot wound to the head, but actually still alive. And tiny little Jordan also still had a pulse. They were raced to hospital immediately, and then seemingly another miracle, 7-year-old Olivia was still hanging on to life. But tragically, eventually every single one of them passed away. I actually can't imagine the dad's reaction. Like, imagine hearing that as a father, that your entire family has just been wiped out like that. It actually opened up before about his wife's mental health, about how much she had struggled with postpartum depression and PTSD. These things are no joke, guys. They'd been married for 5 years and he really did support her as best as he could. And she was desperate for help. She tried therapy, she tried taking medication, but it felt like nothing was working. In fact, she felt like the medication was making her worse. She was found to have anti-anxiety medication and illegal substances in her system at the time of her death. And Cliff was like, although I am angry at my wife for doing this, I also still love her and I'm grieving her. He said his wife was not a monster like people make out, and she had an illness, and he couldn't believe how out of character these actions were. Obviously, he never would have left if he thought she was ever going to be capable of doing anything like this.
If you're bored and want to completely ruin your sleep schedule, let me give you some true crime rabbit holes that will have you up at 3 in the morning with 17 tabs open. The first one is the Sauter family, and I promise that you have never heard anything like this. So it's Christmas Eve in West Virginia in 1945 when a fire breaks out in the Sauter family home in the middle of the night. The parents, George and Jenny, wake up terrified, yelling at their 9 kids, wake up, there's a fire. But unfortunately, only 4 of their kids managed to wake up and escape the house with them. And because of how strong the fire was, their other 5 children were stuck inside. And so for the next few hours until it died down, they just had to watch as their home burned down with all of their kids inside. Now, at first, everyone assumed that they obviously died in the fire, right? Except when firefighters got inside and started looking for them, there were no remains. Like nothing. Not a single bone, not a single trace that 5 children were trapped in that house. And as time went on, the evidence just kept stacking up that maybe since there were no remains, they didn't die at all. Maybe someone took them and the fire was a distraction. And so for the next 80 years to this day, the surviving family members became entirely consumed by this. Consumed by the possibility that maybe their children were kidnapped and that they're still out there somewhere alive. Look, I cannot explain to you how deep this rabbit hole goes, but if you want me to do a full deep dive on this so that you can hear it from me, just say the word. Now, the second one is Mara Murray, and I need you to pay attention to every single detail here because it gets so strange so fast. So it's February 9th, 2004, and Mara, a 21-year-old nursing student, emails her professor out of nowhere and tells him that she won't be in that week because there was a death in the family. Except there was no death in the family. Nobody knows why she said that. Then she goes to an ATM, withdraws every single dollar that she had from her bank account, and stops at a liquor store and buys a whole bunch of alcohol. Then she packs up her car and just drives alone for miles with no explanation to anyone. And a few hours into that drive, she crashes her car into a ditch. And a school bus driver driving by sees her, so he pulls over and asks if she needs any help. But rather than saying yes, she's pleading with him, saying, no, please, I'm okay, don't call the police. Weird. So he drives off, but surprisingly, he ignores her request and calls the cops anyway. And about 19 minutes later, police arrive to the scene. They see the car just as expected, but Ashley is gone, nowhere to be found, which is so strange because all of her belongings are still in the car. There was just no trace of her anywhere. And it has stayed that way for over 22 years. There has been no sightings, no digital footprints, nothing to indicate us of Ashley's existence. And all of that evidence, or lack of, that just kept piling up after this just gave me more questions than answers. Oh, and this one actually has a documentary on Peacock called The Disappearance of Mara Murray. So if you actually need something to watch, then you're welcome. And last but certainly not least in the true crime world is Madeleine McCann, which I feel like everybody knows her name, but nobody actually knows how deep this case goes. So it's May 3rd, 2007, and Madeleine is a 3-year-old girl on vacation in Portugal with her family and friends. And that night, her parents and all the adults decided to go have dinner at a restaurant that was across their hotel. It was close enough that you could see the top of it from where they were sitting, and they just figured since the kids were asleep, were in a safe resort, they'd be fine staying alone in the hotel for a little bit while us adults go and have some fun. But a few hours later, when it's her mom's turn to go check on the kids, she walks in and notices that the bedroom door is wide open, which is really strange because she had left it closed. So she goes to shut it, but as her hand is reaching for the knob, the door slams shut as if there was a draft of air somewhere. So she opens the door back up, she looks around, and that's when she realizes that the bedroom window has been open, which is really weird because she did not remember leaving it like that. So she takes a look at Madeleine's bed to see if maybe she's awake, maybe she's the one who opened it, but her bed is empty. She's gone. Madeleine is nowhere to be found in the hotel or anywhere in the resort for that matter. So they call the police, and what followed after that is still one of the most confusing investigations I have ever seen. Because at some point during Madeleine's disappearance, the parents themselves become the prime suspects. And then the friends did, but those got dropped, and every few years, new suspects kept emerging. Until 2020, when an entirely new suspect was announced that brought this case a new sense of hope. But eventually, even that went nowhere. As of today, almost 18 years later, Madeleine has never been found and nobody knows what happened that night. Or let me rephrase, somebody does, they're just choosing not to tell. There's also a documentary of this case on Netflix that will probably have you scratching your head and losing your mind, but it is really good, so again, you're welcome. If you've never heard of these cases before, which one got you the most? But if you have heard of them, then which one gets you the most?
A uni student beaten to death in her bed, and this chilling message left by the killer. This is the disturbing case of Faith Hedgepeth. Faith was about to turn 20. The girl from South Carolina was an avid churchgoer from a young age, and she grew up to be a popular cheerleader. She was a straight-A student and had earned herself a scholarship to the University of North Carolina. She couldn't wait to graduate and had dreams of becoming a teacher, but tragically, she wouldn't live long enough to see her graduation day. On the 7th of September 2012, a horrific turn of events would unfold. Faith lived in an apartment with her friend Karina Rosario. On the day in question, Faith had been at home while Karina had gone out. Karina had tried to call Faith to ask her for a lift home, but when she couldn't get hold of her, she had called another friend. This other friend was Marisol Rangel, and she gave her a ride back instead. When the pair got back to the apartment, they were horrified by what they found. Now, Faith was lying in bed, nude from the waist down, covered in blood. She'd clearly been beaten in the head, and she'd been partially covered with a quilt. The girls rang investigators straight away, and they determined that Faith had died from blunt force trauma. An R-kit was completed and they found male bodily fluids. Disturbingly, this message was found at the crime scene, written on a paper bag. It appears to say, "I'm not stupid, bitch, jealous." Police determined that the bag was originally from a takeaway which was located near a nightclub that the girls had been the night prior. Investigators then tried to retrace Faith's steps to see what happened in the lead up to her killing. So it turned out the night of the murder, Faith had attended an event and gone to the library after it to meet Karina. They stayed there until about 11:30 p.m. before going back to the apartment to get ready for a night out. They both went to a nightclub until 2 a.m. where they both left and then went back to the apartment again. Now at this point, Faith actually went to bed, but for Karina, she decided she wanted to go back out and see a guy called Jordan McRae, and he picked her up at around 4:30 a.m. Karina said when she got back the next morning, Faith was dead. So she would have had to have been murdered between 4:30 a.m. and later on that morning. Now, a neighbour in the apartment downstairs heard 3 loud bangs, allegedly at 3 a.m. when the girls would have been in there together. Now, was this just the noise of the girls coming back a little bit, maybe tipsy? Officers looked at the girls' phones and found that Faith was on Facebook at around 3 a.m. Her phone sent a text at 3:40 a.m. to a male called Brandon Edwards, stating, "Hey B, can you come over here please? Karina needs you more, please let her know you care." Karina's phone also seemed to be trying to get hold of this same Brandon around the same time. Police started then looking into a suspect called Eric Jones. Now, he was Karina's ex-boyfriend who hated Faith. This was because Faith had helped Karina break up with him. Karina had also had to get a protective order against Eric, which shows he was obviously maybe violent or intimidating in some way towards her. His DNA was collected and tested against the crime scene, but it was not a match. Then new police technology meant that they could figure out the killer was Native American with possibly European or Latino heritage. The case frustratingly though went cold until a breakthrough in September 2021. Police arrested a man named Miguel Salguero Alvarez. His DNA matched the crime scene. It was just by luck that they figured this out because he was arrested on an unrelating driving charge. They collected his DNA at the scene and it was a match for this crime scene. It turned out his handprints also matched handprints found on the murder weapon. Now, frustratingly, we are still awaiting for a trial on this case, although it does look like we are now closer to getting justice for Faith than we have ever been.
The details that came out today about how 14-year-old Celeste Rivas was murdered are horrifying. Prosecutors claim that the singer David purchased 2 chainsaws, a shovel, an inflatable pool, and body bags online, and that is how he disposed of her. Investigators are saying they found text messages between Celeste and David where she was jealous of another woman and how she thought that they were having a serious relationship, and apparently she threatened to expose certain things about him, and the very next day he allegedly took her life. They are saying he purchased an Uber for her to take her to his home where he lied in wait for her, stabbed her multiple times, and then watched her bleed out. It is believed that she was gone by April 24th, and the following day he used Postmates to order a shovel, and about a week later he ordered 2 chainsaws on Amazon. On May 5th, he ordered the body bags, the inflatable pool, and heavy-duty laundry bag. So it is believed that he waited at least those 2 weeks before he ever even dismembered her. They're saying he used that inflatable pool to prevent a mess from being in his home, and that there were fibers from that pool on Celeste. He also removed 2 of her fingers, one of which had the tattoo David on it, and they are still unaccounted for. I found a little insane was that police had a warrant back in September of 2025 where they discovered evidence consistent with the dismemberment of the victim's body, and yet he was not finally arrested until like a week ago. DNA matched Celeste. Mind you, David started talking to Celeste when she was 11 years old. 11, a baby. At one point in 2024, she was reported missing. She ends up going back home. Her parents took away her phone from her, and David allegedly paid $1,000 to one of her schoolmates to get Celeste a phone so they could continue communicating. Apparently, when all this was going on, the police saw that David's number was in the phone that was taken away, and so they went to David like, hey, this is a child. And he said, oh, I didn't know she was a kid. I didn't know she was reported missing. But even after he was told all of that, he still proceeded to talk to her and essay her. It's also being claimed that David took her everywhere, even London, and apparently even to his family's home to meet them. Celeste's body was found in his Tesla, the registered Tesla to him, the day after she would have turned 15. She passed away when she was only 14 years old. Her birthday is in 2010. It just makes me so sad that so many people were aware of their relationship, and I hate to call it that because she's a groomed child. I just hate that no one was able to help her sooner.
She disappeared twice during a dissociative fugue state, only to go missing for a third time, never to be seen again. This is the disturbing case of Hannah Upp, a woman who disappeared 3 times. In September of 2008, 23-year-old Hannah Upp was working as a Spanish teacher in New York City. Just a few days before the school year started, Hannah left her apartment to go for a run, but she never returned. She was quickly reported missing and her face was plastered everywhere. She was in every newspaper that you could possibly think of, and there were thousands of missing person flyers hung around the city. Authorities searched her apartment and found that she left behind her wallet, passport, Metro card, phone, and purse. And after a massive search for her turned up nothing, Hannah was the true definition of disappearing into thin air. But then, 2 weeks later, Hannah was seen on security footage from an Apple store in Midtown Manhattan. She was wearing a sports bra and running shorts, and she had her hair up in a bun, which is exactly what she looked like when she went missing. She was seen on camera walking into the store, and then she used one of the display computers to check her Gmail account. Since her disappearance was so publicized, a man in the store immediately recognized her. But when he asked her if she was Hannah Upp, Hannah said no and that she was fine. 2 days later, she was seen once again at a Starbucks in Soho, but she left before police could arrive. Nearly 3 weeks would go by before a break in this case would come, but it would only bring more questions. One morning, a captain on a ferry spotted a body floating face down in the New York harbor. They were able to hoist the body up and found that it was Hannah, and she was somehow alive. Hannah took a sharp gasp of breath and began crying, and she was then taken to the hospital where she was treated for hypothermia, dehydration, and severe sunburn. During an interview, Hannah stated that she had no recollection of what happened during the last 3 weeks. She said she went from going on a run to being in an ambulance, and that it was like 10 minutes had passed, when in reality it had been 3 weeks. While she was in the hospital one night, she woke up and yelled, quote, "I was in a lighthouse." But when she was questioned about this the next morning, again she had no recollection. After this, Hannah was diagnosed with a rare condition called dissociative fugue, which is a temporary state in which a person has amnesia and ends up in an unexpected place. It can be triggered by a lot of things like trauma and natural disasters, and a person who suffers from this can wander off for months or even years at a time, sometimes even assuming new identities. Hannah tried to return to her normal life, but she would disappear under the same fugue state just a few years later. In September of 2013, Hannah was working as a teacher's assistant in Maryland when she suddenly went missing again. Her backpack and belongings were found on a trail, and much like her first disappearance, she seemed to have vanished into thin air. But 2 days later, she regained consciousness, and she woke up in a creek surrounded by water. Hannah once again had no recollection of what happened over the last 2 days, and she had no idea how she ended up in that creek. After this, Hannah moved to the Pillsbury Heights neighborhood of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. By September of 2017, life was going well for her as a teacher at a local Montessori school, and she lived with a couple of roommates. But as many of you know, around this time is when Hurricane Irma hit, which was then quickly followed by Hurricane Maria. Thousands of people died between the two, and the islands were completely decimated. Hannah was last seen on the morning of September 14th, 2017, leaving her apartment on the East End. The only clue left behind was a note that she had left for her roommate stating that she was going for a morning swim at the nearby Sapphire Beach and then going to school to do some work. But Hannah never came back, and when she didn't show up for a meeting the next day at her school, she was reported missing. Because of the destruction of Hurricane Irma, nobody had cell service or Wi-Fi, and searching for a missing person at this time was straight chaos. Almost everyone was hunkered down inside and debris was everywhere. But a few days later, Hannah's car was found by a construction cleanup crew at Sapphire Beach. Inside the car were all of her personal belongings, including her ID, credit cards, passport, phone, and all of her money. Her keys, sandals, and a skirt of hers were then found down by the beach. Authorities searched by land and air and deployed 3 helicopters to see what they could find. They even searched for her in homeless shelters, hospitals, and morgues, but after 2 days they had to stand down because of Hurricane Maria. To this day, Hannah has never been found, but there have been a few theories as to what could have happened to her. One theory believed by investigators is that Hannah went for a swim that morning and never made it out of the water. There were some employees at a nearby bar who saw her acting strange, so it's believed that Hannah went into another dissociative fugue state and then went into the water. At the time, the ocean had a really strong current with high waves because of the hurricanes, so it was really dangerous for anyone to go swimming. Hannah loved to swim, and she was often known to go swimming for miles at a time, so there was initially a theory that she could have possibly been swept out to an abandoned island, but after many searches, nothing was ever found. Another theory is that in her fugue state, she assumed a new identity and is alive living somewhere else. Dissociative fugue states can be triggered by natural disasters, so this is a real possibility. One of the most bizarre things about this case is the fact that all 3 of her disappearances happened in the same month, which was September, and all 3 of them involved a body of water. But it's now been 7 years, and Hannah has never once come back for her things. She's never made contact with a single soul ever again, and whatever happened to her that day remains a mystery.
She vanished without a trace, but in somebody's bedroom, a tape recorder sat waiting. waiting, and all they had to do was press play. Before we get into today's case, if you prefer deep dives, I post a brand new episode on my podcast, The Born Investigation, every single week. It was summer 1996 at California Polytech University. Kristen Smart was a beautiful 19-year-old student originally from Germany. She was very outdoorsy, she had this gorgeous free spirit, and she was always taking on new adventures. The summer prior, she'd actually been a camp counselor at a camp in Hawaii, and having personally been a camp counselor, like honestly, you make the best memories. She had had the time of her life. In May 1996, she was fully immersing herself in uni life, and on the 25th, she got dropped off at a party off campus. She had a really fun night that evening. She was seen laughing and dancing with her friends, and then at around 2 a.m., she was spotted leaving, but she wasn't on her own. Another student, Paul Flores, had been seen walking her back, and that was pretty normal, like for a guy to walk you back to the dorms or a friend or something. But she then seemed to vanish off the face of the earth. It was actually a couple of days later, the 28th of May, that she was officially reported missing. I guess it's difficult when you are living at uni, like your parents don't really fully know what you're up to, and if friends text you and you don't reply, they might just presume that you're busy studying or you're out enjoying your time. But time went by and it was quite obvious by now that something was seriously wrong. Kristen was not speaking to anyone that she knew. Witnesses told police, yeah, the last person we saw her with was that Paul guy, so police obviously quizzed him. But he was adamant. He said, yeah, I just walked her to the dorms. We parted ways. Like, I also have no idea where she is. So this was now really worrying. A massive search was underway. They had everything, sniffer dogs, helicopters. They were all out. And investigators felt chills down their spine when inside of Kristen's room, they found her bag from that night. She'd clearly not left of her own accord without any of her belongings. Police really couldn't shake this feeling that this Paul guy had something to do with it, or he at least knew more than he was letting on. He'd been the last known person to see her, but they kept hitting dead ends. Now just imagine not knowing what happened to your daughter for 6 weeks. Well, the family didn't not know for 6 weeks. It was 6 years. I cannot imagine the agony. With no sign of Kristen, they had to legally declare her dead in 2002. But they never gave up hope of finding her and getting justice. Cadaver dogs continued to scour the area, and police conducted over 90 interviews from 2011 to 2020. And they kept coming back to this Paul guy. They were like, do you know what? Every time we speak to people, we just feel more certain that he knows something. But not just him, his dad, Ruben Flores, too. I don't know about you, but I feel like there's so much negative that technology has brought to the world, but one way in which technology has just really helped humanity is in crime cases. And in 2021, investigators used ground penetrating radar on Ruben's property, and the results were devastating. They found biological evidence to indicate that Kristen's remains had once been buried beneath the deck of Ruben Flores's home. Presumably they'd then been moved. Now, Paul was immediately charged with murder and Ruben with being an accessory after the fact, because in my opinion, surely you can't dig up your dad's back garden and hide a body there without him really finding out. And what they found in Paul's bedroom made them physically sick. Date R substances were found at Paul's home, but it gets way worse. Homemade videos showing him R-ing young women were also seized. Innocent young women that he was brutally attacking. Disturbing attacks on these girls. Now, there is some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, because I guess Paul does now know what it's like to be a victim of a hideous attack, because he was found guilty and given 25 years to life in prison and has had to move prisons multiple times after being stabbed by other inmates. His dad was actually found not guilty of hiding Kristen's body. I guess there just wasn't enough evidence.
As usual, put your phone down, do your daily tasks while I tell you this crazy story. Anatoly Moskvin was a college professor. He was also a Russian journalist and could speak 13 languages I could barely speak to. Aside from being super smart, he had a hobby. And his hobby was like being an expert on graves, or cemeteries in particular. He called himself a necropolist, which is basically someone who's an expert on cemeteries. He was so fascinated that he visited over 700 cemeteries. Not just that, he wrote lengthy reports on these cemeteries and titled them things like Great Walks Around the Cemeteries, or things like what the dead said. He published these on a weekly newspaper called the Necrologies. And this hobby didn't just, come out of nowhere. One of the papers he published on Necrologies, he said that his hobby came from an incident that happened to him when he was a child. In particular, when he was 13 years old, a group of men literally just grabbed him out of nowhere, took him to a funeral, and forced him to kiss a 11-year-old girl on the lips. She was unalived. That was her funeral. She was no longer with us. And, for some kids, this would be kind of weird. If they did it, they go like, oh, what the hell? But not for Moskvin. Because when he did it again and again and again. He enjoyed it. And something else weird happened. The mom of the girl who was no longer with us literally put a ring on her daughter's finger and on his finger and basically married them to each other. That's how his fascination with the people who are no longer with us started. But it started mild. So it started with him visiting cemeteries, like I said, recording what he saw in a very detailed manner. He even slept in a dead person's coffin. Like, not with them, but like the coffin they were going to be put in a day before their funeral. But in 2009, he took his hobby a lot more seriously. He started digging up graves and taking the skeletal remains out. He did this from 2009 to 2011. There were no leads whatsoever as to what was happening to these graves. But in 2011, police were informed that Muslim graves were being desecrated in Nizhny Novgorod. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And this happened after a terrorist attack in Moscow airport. So they instantly investigated to see what was going on. Now, reports vary over how Moskvin got caught. Some reports say that he was in the Muslim cemetery when he was caught by police with a bag of bones. As a result, because he was caught with a bag of bones, they freaking investigated and searched his apartment, and what they found, creepy, was so creepy. They found these like huge life-size dolls everywhere. They found them everywhere, huge life-size dolls. By the way, he lived with his parents, so how they didn't find this weird and turn him in themselves, I don't know. Their hands, the dolls' hands, were covered in fabric. They even had makeup on them. And it quickly became obvious that these weren't just regular schmegular dolls. They were mummified corpses of human girls. And to make matters worse, when police tried to move these mummified corpses of girls, music started playing. And it turns out Moskvin literally embedded music boxes in their chests. And the corpses were basically stuffed with rags. And their eye sockets were filled with like buttons. He said he'd watch TV with them. In particular, he'd watch cartoons with them. He said he did all of this because he was lonely. And like I said earlier, I briefly mentioned that his parents had no idea. They just thought he liked making dolls, but he did not. He confessed to 44 counts of abusing graves and dead bodies. And what puts it into perspective is the quote of one of the victims who was dug up. The mother said, and I quote, "I still find it hard to grasp the scale of his sickening work, but for 9 years he was living with my mummified daughter in his bedroom. I had her for 10 years, he had her for 9, unquote. Although psychiatrists do say that his condition is improving, whatever that means, the courts have still decided to keep him in prison, which, even though I don't live in Russia, it makes me feel like I can sleep at night. If you found this video interesting, follow me for more and check out my Wild Stories playlist for more content like this.
This is one of the most unbelievable and heartbreaking cases I have ever covered, and it took over 13 years to solve. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Dorothy Donovan. In 1991, Dorothy Mae Donovan was 70 years old. She was a beloved mother of 4 and a very hands-on grandmother. One of her favourite things to do was babysit the grandkids, and when she wasn't doing that, she was tending to her garden, growing her own vegetables, or going to church. She was a vibrant and energetic woman who had so much love to put out into the world. After being widowed for a second time, Dorothy lived alone in a farmhouse on her 163-acre property nearby Harrington in Delaware. Despite living alone in the farmhouse, she wasn't alone on the property. Her son Charles, who was 41 at the time of this case, lived on a trailer in the property, and it was literally a stone's throw away. Their front doors were about 60 yards apart, which is about just over half of the size of a football field. So they lived really close by. The 23rd of June 1991 was starting off as normal as any other morning. Charles had just finished a shift at a local factory at around about 12:30 a.m. when he stopped at a Hardee's fast food restaurant to pick up a burger and a coffee for the travel home. As he walked through the parking lot into his truck and started to drive off, he noticed a man standing at his driver's side window. Charles rolled down the window to hear that this man was asking him for a lift. Charles hooed and hawed a little bit. It was really late. It was getting on to about 1 in the morning now, and he knew that his mum Dorothy back at home didn't go to sleep until she knew that he was home. No matter how old your kids are, they're still your kids. And frankly, he had just finished working a long tiring shift and he just wanted to get home. He told this man, the hitchhiker, that no, he couldn't give him a lift, but this hitchhiker was very persistent. He was telling Charles that he desperately needed to get to a nearby hospital because his sister had just given birth. Reluctantly, Charles agreed and told this man that he would drive him part of the way. He would drop him off at a certain junction. That was as far as he was going to take him. It was getting too late and he wasn't going to be going out of his way. Seemingly happy with this, the man jumped inside of the truck and off they drove. A couple of miles down the road, Charles arrived at the junction that he said he would drop this man off. He pulled over and expected the man to get out, but he wouldn't. Charles firmly reminded the man of their agreement that he wasn't going to be taking him any further and that he needed to get out, and this seemingly flipped a switch inside of the man's mind, who became aggressive and violent. The hitchhiker raised his fist and punched Charles directly in the face, now threatening him and demanding him to give him the keys to the truck and to give him his money. As he's screaming at Charles, he's also threatening him with one of Charles's own screwdrivers that just happened to be inside of the truck. Charles would pull the keys out of the ignition as he fled the truck and raced to a nearby garage for help. He brayed on the windows, pleading for someone inside to help him, but inside was empty. There was no one coming to help. Realising that Charles had taken off with the keys, the hitchhiker, this strange crazed man, began to chase after him, waving around the screwdriver, and he began threatening Charles, saying, "I am going to kill you. I am going to kill you right now." Charles told the man that he didn't want any trouble, and if he just calmed down, he would drive him anywhere that he wanted. The men walked back towards the truck together, and just as they got to the truck, thinking fast, Charles jumped inside, locked the doors, started the truck, and drove away, leaving the man behind. He drove in the opposite direction to his home to ensure that this crazed man wouldn't follow him. After waiting a short while and realising that the man thankfully hadn't followed him, Charles breathed a sigh of relief before making his way back home, only to be stunned when he arrived there because there was the man at his trailer. Charles spun around and raced to a nearby payphone, calling 911 at 1:19 a.m. Despite how frantic Charles was on the phone, the operator listed it as low priority and an officer wouldn't meet with Charles until 3 a.m. The officer escorted him back to his trailer, and when they arrived, they saw that nothing seemed up. Hadn't been robbed or burgled, broken into, nothing like that. The trailer was exactly as Charles had left it. Charles asked the officer to come with him to check on his mother Dorothy, and he would later say that as soon as he opened the door, he knew that something was wrong. When he called out for Dorothy and heard no answer, a shiver went down his spine, because Dorothy always waited up for Charles to get in from work before going to sleep, and her not calling back to him was completely out of the ordinary. Sadly, it would be Charles that would discover the body of his 70-year-old mother, Dorothy Donovan. She had been ferociously stabbed at least 24 times all across her face, her arms, and her chest, and unbelievably, the murder weapon was the screwdriver that the man had stolen from Charles's truck. Aside from the body of Dorothy, nothing else inside of the farmhouse seemed out of place. There was no sign of SA on Dorothy's body, there was no sign of burglary, and no sign of a struggle. This seemed like a random attack. Initially, the police suspected Charles was their main suspect. They found it very hard to believe that he had finished work, picked up a random man, dropped this man off miles away from his home, was attacked by him, managed to get away, and somehow this stranger still managed to find himself at Charles's home, at the home of his mother, to go in and just randomly kill her. They learned that shortly before Dorothy's murder, her life insurance had been upped, and currently Charles was having some financial issues. His description of the hitchhiker was also very vague. He described him as a young black man, and based off of his description, this composite sketch was made. During their investigation though, police were able to corroborate every single thing that Charles claimed. Other witnesses at the Harvey's fast food restaurant would recall seeing the young black man asking different people for lifts, and some of them even saw him getting into Charles's truck. Another witness would recall driving along and actually seeing Charles being chased by a young black man. Charles also had injuries consistent with his story. He claimed to have been punched in the face by this man, and he did have markings to his face. He also had burns on his wrists where he had spilt his coffee on himself during the altercation. Most importantly, however, crime scene investigators would discover a bloody palm print on the banister inside of the farmhouse. From this bloody palm print, they were able to extract DNA, and this DNA did not match Charles. And so he was eliminated as a suspect, and sadly, the murder investigation began to go cold. The big break in the case wouldn't come until 13 years later in 2004, when the DNA from the crime scene was added into CODIS, a new national DNA database. And it wouldn't be until November 2005 that finally they got a match. The DNA belonged to a now 41-year-old man named Gilbert Cannon. He had been incarcerated several times across the past few years for things including burglary, robbery, theft, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, and escape. He was released from prison in 2004, and as standard protocol, his DNA was taken and then added onto the CODIS database, and that is how we ended up getting the match. He was arrested on the 18th of January 2006 while at his girlfriend's house. Initially, he denied any sort of involvement in the murder whatsoever. However, when he was presented with the evidence, he would confess. His confession matched up perfectly with Charles's version of events as well. Gilbert claimed that on the night of the murder, he was high and he was looking to score more drugs. He said that after Charles had took off in the truck, leaving him behind, he just started walking, looking for a house to break into to sleep in. He was just walking along and looking for a house that didn't look like it had anyone in. And the first house that he came across that had no lights on inside was that of Dorothy Donovan. It was a totally random selection. He had no idea that Dorothy was the mother of Charles. When he broke inside, he was shocked to see that Dorothy was still awake, and scared that she would be able to report him to the police and identify him. He killed her with the only weapon that he had on his person, the screwdriver he had stolen from Charles's truck. As bizarre as it sounds, this was all just a sickening, horrific coincidence. Gilbert Cannon would plead guilty to the murder of Dorothy Donovan. He was handed a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole.
She was kept in a box under a bed for 23 hours a day and was only let out to be mistreated in the most inhumane way possible. And this went on for 7 years. And when you hear how she escaped, I fully believe your jaw is going to be on the floor right along with me. So on May 19th, 1977, a 20-year-old girl named Colleen is just standing on the side of the road trying to catch a ride so that she can visit her friend who lives about 100 miles away. She's just out there hoping that some nice person is gonna pull over and offer to take her, which back in the 70s was actually pretty normal. People hitchhiked all the time. It wasn't seen as this crazy dangerous thing that we think of it now. And that's when this car pulls to the side of the road, and inside is a young couple, probably around Colleen's age. And they have a little baby sitting in the back seat, and honestly, the whole thing looked completely harmless. Like the most normal family car you've probably ever seen. The guy introduces himself as Cameron, and the woman is Janine. And Cameron just says, hey, we can definitely take you wherever you need to go, no problem at all. And Colleen looks at this couple and their baby, and she thinks, Okay, yeah, I mean, these people look totally fine, so she gets in the car. Now, as they're driving, Colleen starts to notice something that makes her a little bit uncomfortable. And that's the fact that Cameron keeps looking at her in the rearview mirror, and it's really starting to creep her out a little bit. But she just talks herself out of it. She's like, okay, I'm probably just getting a little bit paranoid. They have a baby in the car. They're being so nice. I need to stop overthinking everything. So they stop at a gas station after a while, and Colleen gets out to use the bathroom. While she's sitting in that bathroom stall, something inside of her just starts going off like an alarm. And not a small, quiet alarm. I mean a really strong, overwhelming sensation in her gut that is basically screaming at her to not get in that car, to leave right now, to not go back to those people. And I think most of us have had a gut feeling before, but this sounds like it was on a completely different level. Like her whole body was trying to warn her. But Colleen talks herself out of it again because she's thinking about the fact that this couple has been nothing but kind to her. They have a baby with them and they're offering to drive her all the way to her friend's house for free. So instead of being rude or dramatic over a feeling that she can't even explain, she decides to go back into the car anyways. And when she opens the door to get back in, she immediately notices something that was not there before. It's this big wooden box sitting right there in the back seat next to where she's about to sit. And Colleen is just staring at it and she's like, okay, that's weird. Where did that come from? But again, she doesn't say anything. She just thinks it's a little off and decides to let it go and mind her business. So they continue driving for another 20 minutes or so when Cameron turns around and looks at Colleen and says, hey, we actually heard that there are some really cool ice caves nearby. Do you mind if we make a quick stop to check them out? And Colleen says, yeah, sure, of course, because what else is she gonna say? These people are doing her a favor by driving her around, so she's not really in a position to start making demands. So Cameron takes an exit off the highway and starts driving down this really long dirt road that goes deeper and deeper into the woods until there are literally just trees everywhere in every direction and no other cars, no buildings, nothing. And then the car stops and Cameron, Janine, and the baby, they all get out and they just leave Colleen sitting inside of the car by herself. And Colleen is looking around through the windows and she's thinking, okay, there are definitely no ice caves around here, so what is going on? And before she could even finish that thought, Cameron yanks the back door open, jumps in, and puts a knife right up against Colleen's throat. And he looks at her dead in the eyes and says, you are going to do exactly what I say. And that is the moment that Colleen realizes that gut feeling that she ignored in the bathroom was right about everything. Cameron forces her to lie down flat in the back seat, and this is when that big wooden box from earlier suddenly makes a lot of horrible sense. Because Cameron had built it specifically for this moment. It's basically a soundproof box lined with carpet inside of it, so that when he puts it over someone's head, no matter how loud they scream, nobody can hear a single thing from the outside. So now Colleen is lying down in the back of this car with a carpet-filled box locked over her head, completely unable to see or hear anything, with her wrists tied together, questioning if she's about to be ended. And that's when Janine and the baby get back into the car, completely calm, like nothing just happened. And then they just drive home. They wait until it gets dark outside so that none of the neighbors can see them. And then Cameron takes Colleen out of the car and leads her inside of the house with a blindfold on her eyes now. And he takes her straight down into his basement. And what was waiting for her inside of that basement is honestly what makes this case one of the most disturbing things I have researched. Because Cameron has not built this overnight. He had been planning and building and preparing this space for a long time, specifically for this. Once Colleen is inside the basement, Cameron tells her to step onto this box and to raise her arms above her head towards the ceiling. And when he does this, he snaps handcuffs around her wrists and locks them to a beam above her so that her arms are stretched up and she can barely move. And then he cuts off all of her clothes so that she's completely exposed. And I'm not gonna go into every single detail here because this video would get taken down. But just know that what Cameron did to her in that basement was one of the most cruelest, dehumanizing things that one person could do to another. And while all of this is happening, Janine is right there in the house too, and she isn't stopping any of it. She isn't calling for help. If anything, she actually joined in on it. And that is something that this case really forces you to sit with, because Colleen was not just failed by one person that night, she was failed by two. After Cameron is done, he takes Colleen, who at this point is exhausted and in pain and completely disoriented, and he lays her down inside of another box. This one is shaped more like a coffin, and then he puts the carpet-filled box back on top of her head and locks it. And then he chains her wrists to the sides of the coffin box so that she genuinely cannot even move, not a single inch. And before he walks away, he leans down to her ear and says one of the most terrifying things to her. "Go ahead and scream and I will cut your vocal cords. I've done it before. I don't mind doing it again." And then he just leaves her there, and that became Colleen's life. 23 hours out of every single day, she was locked inside of that box in complete darkness, unable to move her arms, unable to breathe. It was like constant suffocation, just breathing in carpet fibers and dust and lying there in this tiny enclosed space with a box over her head. And she was only let out for 1 hour a day. That was it. And it wasn't even for good reason. It was because Cameron got bored and wanted to her a little more. And this went on for months. Now in January of 1978, so like 7 months later, Cameron decides that what he's been doing just isn't enough for him. And so he actually sits Colleen down and hands her a written contract, and he forces her to sign it. And what she is signing is basically an agreement saying that she belongs to him as a slave for the rest of his life. And because of everything that he had already put her through, because her mind had been so completely broken down by this point, she signs it. But here's the thing that makes this case so psychologically different from a lot of other cases. Cameron had also built this entire fake world inside of her head to make sure that she would never even think about escaping. He told her that she was being watched at all times by this huge and very powerful secret organization called The Company. And if she ever tried to run away or tell somebody what was happening, the company would find her, and what they would do to her would be far worse than anything Cameron had done. And for the cherry on top, they would also go after her family too. And I know that sounds like something a person could just think their way out of, like, okay, obviously that's not real, just run. But you have to understand what months of isolation and psychological manipulation does to a human brain. Because by this point, Colleen believed in the company the same way that she believed in anything else that was real in her life. Like, it was not a question if it was real. This was a fact to her. And now, after signing this contract, Colleen isn't even called Colleen anymore. She is called Kay. That is her only identity. And now she has to call Cameron Master. Eventually, Cameron decides to move the entire family to a mobile home in a place called Red Bluff, California. And they bring Colleen with them, obviously, and her new living situation is in a wooden box that Cameron built underneath the waterbed that he and Janine sleep in every single night. Now, over time, because Colleen is doing everything that she is told and never giving Cameron any sort of reason to punish her, he actually starts letting her do small things outside of the box. Like, she's allowed to go for a jog or do some yard work or help take care of the kids around the house. And this is the part of the story that I think is really hard for people to understand from the outside. Because here is Colleen outside with neighbors nearby with a phone inside of the house, and she does not run. She doesn't go asking for help or saying a single thing about what is happening to her. And people hear that and they think, why wouldn't you just go? But that's because people have never had the company living inside of their heads for years. That fear was more real to Colleen than anything else around her, and Cameron made sure of that every single day. But then in 1981, which is 4 years after the day that she got inside of that car, Cameron does something that seems so completely unbelievable given everything. He lets Colleen go and visit her family by herself. No Cameron, no supervision, just Colleen getting into a car and driving to see her family alone. And she goes and she hugs them, she sits with them, and she doesn't say anything. Her family could tell that something was really off with her. I mean, she was wearing homemade clothes, she had no money, she hadn't been in contact with them for years. But they were so scared that if they pushed her or made her feel cornered by asking her a whole bunch of questions, that she would just disappear again completely. So they stayed quiet and just tried to enjoy the fact that she was finally home. And then the next day, Colleen came back to visit again, but this time, Cameron came with her and introduced himself as her boyfriend. And that's when this photo was taken, him smiling like an absolute normal human being, and her family having no idea, none at all, that this man had been keeping their daughter in a box under his bed for 4 years. After that visit, Cameron decided, wait, I've given Colleen a little too much freedom. And just like that, she went right back underneath that waterbed inside of that box for 23 hours a day. And this time, it stayed that way for another 3 more years. It wasn't until 1983 that Colleen was allowed to exist exist in the real world again. She gets reintroduced to the neighbors, and she's even allowed to get a job cleaning rooms at a local motel. Now for what? I don't know. Maybe bills were tight or something. But after years in a box, that was probably like stepping onto another planet. But then Cameron does something that ends up being the thing that unravels all of it. He tells Janine that he wants Colleen to become his second wife. And this causes something in Janine to break. Now hold on though, because I want to be really clear about something. Janine is not the hero in this story. She participated in what happened to Colleen and watched it happen for years and years. But what came out later is that Janine had also been a victim of Cameron in her way. He had actually been manipulating and tormenting her since the very beginning of their relationship. And she had survived it the only way that she knew how, which was to just shut down the part of her brain that was aware of what was happening around her and keep going. But the second wife thing was just something that she could not shut off. Like, that's where she drew the line. My guess is that she just wanted that part of their relationship to be sacred. So in August of 1984, Janine goes to Colleen privately and tells her the truth, that the company is not real, that Cameron made the whole thing up, that there is nobody watching her, that there never was. Now what happens next is a bit shocking. Colleen doesn't call 911. She doesn't go to the nearest police station. She doesn't immediately go and tell the world what happened to her. Instead, she walks to a bus station, picks up a payphone, and calls Cameron and tells him that she's leaving. Because all of the psychological brain rewiring that Cameron and Janine did to her, it didn't just disappear the second that she said the company was fake. She was still mentally attacked. And Cameron, this man who kept her under his bed for years and signed her life away to slavery, starts crying on the phone. And he's telling her, please Colleen, please don't leave me. But my girl hangs up the phone, gets on the bus, and goes home. But I wouldn't even call it escaping yet, because for the next several months, she keeps calling him. But she did later explain that it was to give him a chance to come forward himself, partly because Janine did ask her to give him that chance. But he did not come forward. So 3 months later, Janine went to the police herself. Cameron Hooker was arrested, charged, and convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 104 years in prison. And Janine actually received immunity from prosecution in exchange for her cooperation with the case. Now Colleen, who spent 7 years of her life being manipulated, all of the above, went on to rebuild her life completely. She got married, she had children, and she even started speaking publicly about what she went through so that other people can understand how something like this is even possible. I love y'all. Please be safe out there. Mwah. Group hug.
A 14-year-old girl is missing for over 4 years, and then in 2023, she comes back. On the morning of September 13th, 2019, 2 days before she would disappear, Alicia Navarro told her mother that she was feeling a little bit more anxious than usual. She asked if she could skip school that day. Her mother, Jessica Nunez, agreed. She took Alicia to McDonald's to get her favorite meal. The two of them spent the day together doing activities that Alicia liked, and then they returned home that afternoon. By all accounts, it was a good day, normal day, and a day that Alicia's mom would replay in her head over and over and over again, wondering if she missed something. Alicia Navarro was 14 years old. She lived with her mother, her stepfather, and her two younger siblings in Glendale, Arizona. She had been diagnosed with high-functioning autism at a very young age, and because of that, she relied heavily on her mother for a lot of things, a big one being reassurance in social situations. Alicia was the kind of girl that liked what she was used to. She loved routine. She was very selective about her food, and any change to her schedule would cause her anxiety to go up significantly. Her daily routine was eating the same meals every day, wearing either long-sleeved shirts or hoodies every day, regardless of the temperature outside, and going to and from the same places every single day. She didn't have many close friends at school, given that any face-to-face, in-person interaction could very easily overwhelm her, but online, playing video games, she was different. She was around 10 or 11 years old when she started spending more time on the internet, and it made sense. She really liked it because it made her feel comfortable. She could still play games and socialize with other kids online without having the added pressure of having to stand in front of someone making eye contact. She just preferred it, and it also made her feel safe because it was something that she could do from the comfort of her own home. Her mother said Alicia's otherwise introverted personality took on a different kind of energy when she would play games online. She also described her to be very intelligent, very shy, but very, very kind. Quote, "My daughter was a really loving and caring person. Everywhere she went, if it was an animal or a person, she cared," end quote. And as supportive as her mother Jessica was in regards to doing whatever made Alicia happy, and even though the two of them were best friends apart from just being mother and daughter, Jessica was her mother at the end of the day, and safety always came first. Which is why when she found out that Alicia had been sharing personal information on an internet chat at one time, she sat her down and she explained to her how you shouldn't be talking to strangers online. Explaining that you really don't know who the person is that is behind the screen and that you don't know what their intentions could be. Saying, look, have fun all you want, play the games that you want to play, just do not share anything personal about you, your family, where you live, anything like that online. By 2019, Alicia Navarro was 14 years old and she was a freshman in high school, and she was still the same in regards to her daily routine, eating the same foods, going to school, coming home to play video games. But in regards to her appearance, there were some changes that her mom started to notice in her. She started to express interest in makeup and different clothing items that were not all long sleeved like she was used to. She would talk about hanging out with friends outside of school, which was huge, and she also showed interest in a specific comic book and a protein powder, which may sound kind of random, but that's my point. She started talking about certain things that she had never really talked about before, on top of being interested in changing things about her appearance. It was different. She was different. But also, freshman in high school, that is peak of when a teenager starts to figure out what she likes, what she doesn't like. So changes in a girl her age are expected given that she's now entering this new phase of her life. The night of September 14th, 2019, Alicia was in her room. She played video games until a little bit after midnight. Sometime before 1 a.m., she went downstairs for a glass of water. Her mom was still awake downstairs. She was waiting for her husband to get home from work, aka Alicia's stepdad. He worked night shifts, but Jessica saw her daughter. Alicia looked happy, normal. She asked her mom when she was planning on going to sleep, saying that she needed to make sure that she got enough sleep. They chatted for a minute until Alicia eventually went back upstairs. Alicia's stepdad got home around 2 in the morning, and him and Jessica eventually fell asleep as well. That night was the last time that Jessica Nunez saw her daughter. The next morning, Jessica noticed that Alicia wasn't coming downstairs at the time when she normally would have. They went to go check on her, and she wasn't in her bed. After the immediate shock and confusion, things only got weirder, because Jessica noticed that there was something on Alicia's bed. It was a note. She left a note on her pillow that read, quote, "I ran away, I will be back, I swear, I'm sorry," end quote. You can imagine the shock and the big wave of concern that absolutely consumed Jessica when she read that note. Not only because Alicia was only 14 years old and had no business sneaking out, but she was also the kind of girl that did not feel comfortable at all in new places, in the dark, in the middle of the night, nor with anyone else apart from her mom, basically. Alicia had a routine. She had always had one, and she followed it religiously because if something out of the ordinary happened, she didn't handle it well. And she had been that way kind of her entire life, so what in the world could have made her walk away from her bedroom, from her house, on her own accord? Jessica and the stepdad searched the neighborhood immediately, and when they peeked around their house, they found something in the backyard. Chairs that had been stacked up against the brick wall, and shoe prints matching Alicia's size leading up and over the fence. Alicia had also taken a small black backpack with cat ears, a sweatshirt, a pair of shoes, makeup, a body spray, her iPhone, and her MacBook, but she had left behind the charges to all of those. That detail in itself proved to be a very significant one, because you don't forget your chargers if you're planning on running away and being gone for a while. You don't take your chargers with you if you do plan on coming back and you know that you won't need them, but you could forget them if someone was waiting for you outside and you needed to leave fast. Maybe you forget them if you're in a hurry, or if you think that wherever you are headed will have whatever you need. What was interesting as well was that Alicia had walked down a path that was not covered by the neighbor's surveillance camera. Whether she did that on purpose or not, we don't know for sure, but it felt like a very big possibility that she had planned this, or that somebody else had planned it for her. Glendale police were notified that morning. The case grew very, very quickly. The FBI got involved. A $20,000 reward was offered. Billboards went up, not only in Arizona, but also in California. Jessica herself had them put up in Nevada, Texas, and Mexico too, anywhere she thought that Alicia might be seen. But there was nothing. No phone activity, no social media activity, no trace, no leads. Jessica herself said from very early on that she believed that Alicia could have been talking to a stranger online, someone that may have been encouraging her to leave her house that night. Quote, "According to the evidence, I do believe that she was lured online," end quote. And the evidence did support her. Remember, months before the disappearance, Jessica had discovered that Alicia had been chatting with someone online and given them information that she should not be giving out to strangers. Come to find out, the person that she was talking to was a man that was much older than her. Who that man was is unclear, which makes me think that there was little to no information on whatever online profile he had. There was also the fact that one of Alicia's friends had mentioned to authorities that Alicia had mentioned that she was planning on running away, and she had also mentioned something about having a burner phone. Another one of Alicia's friends mentioned that she had mentioned to him that she had a boyfriend. There was also a witness that came forward early on in the investigation saying that they believed that they had seen Alicia walking around the area with a much older man. But other than that, authorities didn't really have much to go off. There was little to no evidence that was proving to be actually beneficial beneficial. And it was a tricky one because as weird as it seemed, as far off as it would have been for Alicia to have wanted to leave on her own accord, any sort of clues or witness statements to authorities in their eyes did feel like she had left on her own accord. She was 14 though. Weeks turned into months, months turned into a year, then 2 years, then 3 years. Alicia's last words to her mother were written on that piece of paper. I ran away. I will be back. I swear I'm sorry. In September of 2022, her mom Jessica stated, quote, I'm still waiting for her to fulfill her promise, end quote. Jessica never stopped. She hired private investigators. She partnered with a Florida-based nonprofit that works with online cases like Alicia. She kept buying billboards. She kept talking to the media. She kept going because there was no world in which Jessica was just going to accept that her daughter was gone. And then, on Sunday, July 23rd, 2023, 1,407 days after Alicia walked over that backyard wall and left her house, something happened that nobody expected. A young woman walked into the Montana Police Department, a small town roughly 35 miles from the Canadian border, and identified herself as Alicia Navarro. She said that she had been reported missing and that she wanted to clear her status. She was 18 years old. Crazy. Amazing that she was alive, obviously, but crazy. That police station contacted Glendale Police immediately, and 3 days later, Glendale Police held a press conference, quote, Alicia Navarro has been located. She is by all accounts safe, she is by all accounts healthy, and she is by all accounts happy, end quote. Of course, this was the best news. I mean, there are no words to explain the relief that Jessica felt when she heard that her daughter was still alive, yet a million questions that needed to be answered. Where had she been? Who had she been with? What happened that night all the way back in 2019? Why Montana and why now? Detectives spoke to Alicia by video conference. The exchange was pretty brief and authorities released 27 seconds of it. Quote, did anyone hurt you in any way? No, no one hurt me. Okay, because our goal is we just want to make sure that you're safe. I understand that. Thank you for offering to help me, end quote. Jessica posted a video on Facebook shortly after the return of Alicia was announced, quote, I do feel that I owe this video to the community and to God. I want to give glory to God for answering prayers and for this miracle. For everyone who has missing loved ones, I want you to use this case as an example. Miracles do exist. Never lose hope and always fight, end quote. She also said that she herself didn't have any details, but that the important thing was that Alicia was alive. But this was not a quick ending case closed. It was, as Glendale PD said at the time, quote, probably only the beginning of where this investigation will go, end quote. Alicia was located in Montana. Her family, if you remember, lived in Arizona, and she stayed in Montana after she went to the police station to say, hey, it's me, I'm alive, I'm here. So her mom had to identify her, or was able to identify her through FaceTime, but she had not yet seen her in person. And again, so many questions still left unanswered. When police officers in Montana arrived to investigate, they found that Alicia had not been alone. She had been living in an apartment with a man by the name of Edmund Davis, 36 years old at the time, in his apartment. And neighbors of his told investigators that the two of them had been living together for at least a year. Police officers were able to get a search warrant to search Edmund's apartment, and that's when things got dark, for lack of a better word. When officers arrived, Alicia was the one to answer the door. Officers saw Edmund in the kitchen in the background throwing a cell phone into a trash can and placing items on top of it as if he was trying to hide it. In other words, he was caught in real time trying to throw away evidence. The phone and other electronic devices were seized. Forensic investigators went through them, and on them they found a lot of material and evidence related to CP, from as young as 5 years old to 13. In October of 2023, Edmund Davis was charged with 2 felony counts of essay of children. However, investigators were careful to note that those charges were not formally connected to Alicia's case. That said, he was the man that she had been living with, and he had spent years, possibly beginning when she was 14 years old, if not younger, in contact with her. In September of 2024, he pled guilty to 1 out of the 2 counts, and on February 11th of 2025, he was sentenced to 100 years in the Montana State Prison with 50 years suspended. He will not be eligible for parole for another 25 years, I believe. Jessica Nunez responded publicly, quote, I'm very happy that he is behind bars and he won't cause any more harm. I can't recover the years that I was not with her, and I cannot change the trauma, but I can appreciate my daughter is alive and that we are healing. From what I could find, we do know that Alicia and her mom were eventually reunited in person. However, authorities, I don't think to this day, have said how Alicia ended up in Montana, and Edmund Davis has not been charged in connection with her disappearance. So whatever happened in those 4 years, whatever was said to her online, whatever promises were made, and whatever she experienced inside of that apartment in Montana, It's still not fully known to the public, and honestly, because she is alive and well and happy and healthy and with her family, I don't think that it should be, because if, say it was something bad, and being in an apartment with a man like that, I doubt anything good happened inside of the apartment. Say it was traumatizing, which it probably was, she needs to heal, and having the worst experience of her life all over the media and all for the public to read all the details and everything that happened, that can't be good for her. So maybe it is good that we don't know. I'm happy to say that the latest update that I could find is that Alicia is now working, receiving counseling, and preparing to attend college. She is, I think, around 20 years old now, maybe 21. But yeah, everything says that she is healing, she's with family, she's working on getting some sense of normalcy now, which is all that you can hope for, and I hope that she is well and happy. We've covered cases on my page before where I'm like, this is crazy, and then sometimes it happens that I look into it and then I have more questions. But I'm just relieved that that man is behind bars, because ew. Yeah, that is all I have for today. Thank you for spending time with me today and for listening to Alicia's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. And I mean it when I say that. Like, if you are not having a good day, go do something that you know makes you happy. Go for a walk, go buy yourself ice cream, get yourself a treat. You deserve it. And I will see you guys in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of Antron Singleton, aka Big Lurch. Antron was born on September 15th, 1976 in Dallas, Texas. He had started writing poetry at the age of 7 and transferred that into rap lyrics. By the time he was 15 years old, he had wrote many rap songs, performing for his friends and open mic night. But by the time he was in his 20s, Antron felt like his career wasn't going anywhere. He didn't have any connection to the industry. So that's when he decided to make his big move to California. To celebrate his move, he changed his rap name from G Spade to Big Lurch. His friends was calling him that anyway because he was very tall, standing nearly 6'7". Big Lurch was the butler from the Addams family back in the day. When he moved to California, he was living in one of his friends' garage, and that's where he met Mike Mosley, who was a popular producer working with E40, Tupac. Mike Mosley felt bad for Lurch, him living in the garage, so he decided to take him under his wing. He thought he was super talented. In 1996, Lurch finally got his big break, being featured on one of E40's songs alongside Mystical. After that, he decided to start his own group called the Cosmic Slop Shop, which was a studio that he will work out of frequently with these two guys, Rick Rock and Dooney Baby. The group's debut album, titled The Family, was released in 1988, but the album didn't sell. It got a lot of negative reviews, and it wasn't commercially successful, causing the group to break up. They all started doing their own thing. This is when Big Lurch started releasing mixtapes to generate some type of buzz and to bring in some type of money, but it was slow. September of 2000, Lurch had got news that his grandmother had passed away. This was also around the time of his birthday, and he headed back to Texas. While in Texas, he was hit by a drunk driver. He was hit with so much force that he had broke his neck. Coming out of a coma in so much pain, they would give him morphine. He had severe spinal and nerve damage to the point where he could barely walk, and sometimes he would just fall down. This was causing the doctors to give him more morphine shots than normal. Lurch became addicted. When he was released from the hospital a few weeks later, he ran out of morphine. When he couldn't get his hands on any more to cope with his pain, he turned to PCP. Now, while Lurch was in the hospital, his mixtape was causing a little buzz in the streets. He didn't know this because he almost died. He'd been in a coma. But when he got out, he was hit up by Stress Free Records, who was owned by the famous lawyer Milton Grimes. Milton said he wanted to help Lurch get back on his feet, and he also promised that he would work with Roger Trout Jr., and Lurch was ecstatic about this because he had been wanting to work with him. And he asked Lurch to fly out to LA to get started, and Lurch agreed. But when Lurch got into the studio with Milton and his crew, he didn't like the atmosphere. Milton and his crew were Crips. Big Lurch was a Blood. So they would try to intimidate him, try to punk him in the studio. And he did not like that, and he wanted off the label. This is when he went back to Texas and tried to make music on his own, which did not work. So that's when he started to sell drugs, which eventually landed him in jail. But who bailed him out? Milton Grimes. Because remember, I said he was also a lawyer. He told Lurch that he wanted to help him with his case as long as you come back and sign with me and get in this studio. And Lurch felt like, he didn't have no other choice. So when he got out, he made his way back to LA and back in the studio with Milton Grimes and his crew. But Big Lurch was still having the same problem. Milton's crew was still trying to punk him in the studio. They was even threatening his life this time. So Big Lurch said, I'm going to go get me some LA Blood gang members to be on my side, to be in the studio with me. But the gang members that he befriended were heavy Sherm users. Now, at this time, Big Lurch was on PCP, but he was using small amounts. These gang members was on that. And they was forcing Lurch to be on that too. He said he didn't want to look like a punk. He didn't want to look like he couldn't hang with them with the PCP usage, which is crazy. Lurch even moved in with one of the gang members named Thomas Moore. Thomas Moore had a girlfriend named Tanisha Isaias, who was 21 years old. On April 10th, 2002, the police were called from a woman claiming that she seen a man naked in the street, covered in blood, chewing, mumbling, and looking up at the sky. She knew that man. It was Antron Singleton, Big Lurch. When the police got to the scene, the only response they would get from Lurch was a growl. The woman who called 911 also knew Tanisha. She ran to her apartment when she seen the state that Lurch was in. When she got to the apartment, Tanisha was laid on the floor. Her chest was cut open. She had bite marks all over her chest and on her cheek. She had missing organs, multiple stab wounds, a broken neck, a fractured eye socket. It was even fragments from a knife lodged in her shoulder. Her autopsy report showed that she had a crazy amount of PCP in her system. She wasn't known to do drugs. The amount that was in her system was so much to the point where it's like she couldn't have ingested that herself. Like maybe it was forced. When the police first took Lurch in, they noticed that he had pieces of meat in his beard. After being examined, they found the same pieces of meat in his stomach. After further examination, those pieces of meat were the lung of 21-year-old Tanisha. Lurch woke up 2 weeks later, not even knowing that he was in jail. He doesn't remember anything about the murder. So what the hell happened? On April 10th, 2002, the crew went to the Hoodie Awards. Big Lurch and his Blood Gang crew. After the Hoodie Awards, they went back to Thomas Moore's house. And that's when everybody was smoking PCP. They was dipping their cigarettes in it. I don't know anything about PCP, so this is what he's saying. They was dipping their cigarettes in PCP, and he said he was getting so much PCP passed to him that he thought it was strange. According to somebody at the house, Thomas Moore, the man who lived there, left. After Thomas left, they said that Big Lurch ordered everybody to leave except for Tanisha. And they're saying that this is when everything transpired. Lurch was charged with first-degree murder, torture, and aggravated mayhem. His trial started in June of 2003. And who was his lawyer? Milton Grimes. Milton told Lurch to plead insanity and he'll be out in a few years. But the only problem with that is you can't plead insanity when there's drugs in your system. But he stuck to that insanity plea, and Lurch was heavy sedated during his trial. He said he doesn't even remember anything about it. In November of 2003, he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of this. During trial, they played a song from this album where Lurch talked about Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Mason, and all them other type of folks. And they're saying that he's been wanting to do a crime like this. And The evidence in the house is what's getting me, because it was a child scooter that they said Tanisha was hit upside the head with. It was a bloody handprint on it. The bloody handprint was not Big Lurch's. Big Lurch lived in this house. Remember, I said he moved in with Thomas Moore. It was no pieces of clothing from him in that house. And when they went to get Tanisha's body out of that house, this was also a dope house. It was a trap house. There was no guns and there was no drugs. Big Lurch said himself that that house was full of guns and full of drugs, so he thought that it was weird that they found none of that. It was also a pit bull in the house, and Milton Grimes didn't say that at all. Big Lurch was thinking maybe the pit bull had something to do with some of the bite marks on her body as well, but Milton never mentioned that. And right after his sentencing, Tanisha's mother filed a wrongful death claim against Tanisha's boyfriend, Milton Grimes, and his record label, saying that they fed these rappers drugs to do crazy things. She does not believe that Big Lurch killed her daughter. She said that same night, April 10th, Tanisha was packing up her shit about to leave Thomas. But none of this was ever said or put out there. Tanisha's mother also said that she thought Lurch was so high on PCP, he thought the piece of her daughter's lung was just a piece of meat.
I don't believe he done that. If I believe he probably was off on that PCP and, he tripped. He saw that piece of lung lying on the floor and he, probably figured it was a piece of meat or whatever. So he just took it and started chewing on it. But far as him, no. Evidence there like footprints, fingerprints on doors, bloody fingerprint, shoe at the back door, and it's like, where all this evidence go? It was DNA. Who DNA was? They said DNA came up lost.
Big Lurch said his case was so mishandled. He said that he was set up by Milton Grimes and by Thomas Moore and his crew. Big Lurch is now sober. He said he reads a lot and he still raps. He is still trying to prove his innocence. He has an interview with Vlad TV. Y'all should check out. I was tagged a lot in this story. Never heard of this. This story is wild. Do y'all think he was set up? Milton Grimes, I don't know. From what I read about him, he got a lot of shit going on. I think he got a case right now that he going through. I don't trust him. But I do think they set Big Lurch up. I'm with the mama. What do y'all think?